Hello. Can you hear me all right? Oh, you're still muted. You're muted still.
Unmute. Good morning.
Unmute. Good morning.
It's the Mondayest Monday ever. I'm sure everybody will feel that and understand it. Good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living, whether that's projects, program, product, groups, operations manager. Maybe you've owned your own business. You wear all the hats. This weekly series is definitely for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I, we explore various project management episodes from the perspective of what not to do as you manage those projects. And each episode of Project Failure Files, we talk about the common pitfalls, sharing personal stories and experiences, and explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
So in this episode, we're talking about one of the most important things you can do to achieve project success. Ensure that you have business alignment. So our topic today is the key to success, striving for business alignment.
Yeah, this title might be confusing for some people. So, how can you kick off a new project without understanding where it fits into your business? And yet, it happens, Sharon.
It happens. It happens more often than I really want to even admit or talk about. And at least in the IT space, it's really easy. They come up with a problem, someone tries to fix it. There's no proper sign off for management, no official project sponsor. And it can go anywhere from what we call shadow IT all the way into actual IT.
I've been through this in a bunch of different versions of this experience. Sometimes maybe you have a project sponsor, but you're being told to get started without first identifying and speaking with all the stakeholders. And then 3 months later, you're wondering why those other teams are pushing back on the project. Or even a more common scenario, Sharon, is when you have like an engineer who identifies, hey, there's this issue here. I'm just going to go and I know the solution and I'm going to start building on that without talking to anybody about that to understand the scope, the impact, any of those things.
Yep, that's exactly what happens.
So with every episode here, please feel free to comment throughout the episode, share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we might have missed.
All right, let's get started. Maybe we can talk about how one goes about getting aligned.
Well, first and foremost, maybe talk to people.
It's all about communication. People just got to know what's going on.
I guess that's the thing. I mean, I guess defining what business alignment actually means. It could mean a number of different things. It could be making sure that we're aligned on the tools and methodologies. Because if you have a process, if you have a methodology, and I know, Sharon, you've never heard this before, but you're less likely to go astray. You're more likely to ask those important questions like, who's our executive sponsor? Who are the stakeholders here? What are the primary drivers of this project? How does this project align with the goals of the business? And that's another reason I love when organizations and far too few companies actually go and look at as part of their annual cadence of here's what the company's striving for, our top level initiatives, and then let's break that down to each business unit, each team, down to the individual to know the things that I'm working on day in, day out, how it is chipping away at and striving for achieving those company-wide goals. Like that's the ultimate alignment. You don't always have that degree of alignment, but that should be the goal.
Yeah, I mean, and we even talk about what's really funny to me is when you see organizations, and I get some gigantic organizations that work completely in different groups, but even like mid-sized organizations where different departments will use different methodologies. And so you've got one group that's handling it one way and another group that's handling another way. And so they're like, oh, well, we'll just throw you in our sprint. And the other group's like, what's a sprint? Or they'll say, well, we'll throw you in the current sprint. And the other group's like, oh yeah, us too. But then you go to find out that they've got like completely different dates or different ways of managing it. And it gets really confusing because, like you said, there's no common language, there's no common dates, there's no common management, there's no common conversation. And so essentially, they're trying to wedge you into things. And so sometimes what ends up happening is you just don't.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I've worked in organizations on both sides of where some that say like every department, every project must follow the methodology, and there's pros and cons to that. And there's other organizations that say, and I fall more in this camp, it's like, look, you can have different teams using different tools, different methodologies for that. Like, I'm not going to dictate how you go get your work done, but we have to clarify the common denominators, the top level. This is what we're achieving. This is what we're working towards. And this is kind of my management style as well, is that the focus on the outcome, what we're trying to achieve, having that alignment, whether you take 7 steps or 27 steps in your methodology to get to that point of the agreed outcome, the timeline, the budget, all those things, like, hey, let me get out of your way. I'm not going to stand here behind you dictating what to click next on with your mouse. Like, have at it.
Yeah, I think the big outcome of all of this, and where people see the most success, is around reporting. So when we think about, and I know we've had this conversation in other episodes, and we'll probably have it again, but there's one thing to everybody getting their stuff done. There's another thing to the important people in the organization who decide how to spend the money, because that's really what matters at the end of the day. Being able to understand where everybody is at, where, they need attention, where they're having success, where they need to, put more resources, things like that. And when all that rolls up, this reporting that kind of comes from different areas and different organizations rolls up into kind of this higher level, everywhere from a portfolio level to an executive level view, the alignment in the organization becomes very crystal clear on where you're having success and where you need help when you're better aligned. Whereas when you're less aligned, you're going to see the biggest impact be in when I need something, I may not be able to get it. And I remember organizations that I've been in where one of my roles, I would come in and they would say, well, I don't even understand why we have to do this stuff. And I'm like, well, do you need more people? Do you need more resources? Do you need more tools? Do you need more money, more funding? And they'd be like, yeah. They're like, we're not getting that. We've been begging and begging and begging. I'm like, right, because your reporting that's rolling up is not showing that you need that. You just saying it is not always enough. And so I think the biggest impact that I see when you see true business alignment is when the reporting all comes together and the right resources and things go to the right areas.
In my experience, it's the leaders that promote the chaos. I mean, just go get this done. And I don't care about this. Go do that. Are the ones that at the end of all that come back and say, well, what did we learn? What's the repeatable process? Like, how are we supposed to improve on this? People, it's like, come on, you can't have it both ways. If part of your goals, and I think it should be a stated, documented goal, is that you're constantly reviewing your methodology, your process, have the framework, have the guardrails, have those pieces in place, and you're constantly refining that. You're doing your best to stick to that model, whatever it is. But recognizing that you need to change and adjust, and sometimes you use pieces that on other projects you don't need, kind of all those the nuances of each individual project. But it gives you those common denominators so that later you could go back and say, well, how can we improve on, overall how we communicate, how we collaborate together, how we can make this more efficient, how we can optimize these aspects of the project so that we can do more under budget, ahead of schedule? How do you improve without having that alignment? It's the mistake of treating everything as a one-off.
Yeah. And so many times, and I would say another issue around this is, when different groups try to all solve the same problem. So without business alignment, you're going to see little spinoffs, right? You're going to see maybe 3 or 4 different places all have a similar problem. And so they all try to tackle it individually. And instead of coming together as a group and solving it holistically, they're just solving these little one-offs. And eventually you have a different tool in 3 different places to solve the same problem, which is a budget issue, but it's also a programmatic issue. It's a systems issue that can, down the road as you grow, create, scaling problems and support problems and all kinds of other issues. And I liken this, we've had so many sports analogies, but I think about the idea of think about it in a football game. If 2 people, outside of the quarterback were so the goal is to run the ball to the end of the field, but I don't have a ball. So I'm just going to grab a ball real quick. And so now I have 3 people with footballs running to the end of the field. Does it solve the problem? I mean, kind of, but does it create as many problems as it solves? Absolutely.
I was thinking here too, we've kind of covered, what are the benefits of having aligned projects with the business requirements. We've kind of talked about, I want to make sure I've got my short list here. Improving collaboration, of course, across all teams. So, it helps kind of break down the communication silos, make sure that, hey, we're all working on the same objectives. It makes sure that we're more productive, we're more efficient. It then, depending on the project, could foster end user adoption as well when it's aligned with the business needs. And you're more likely going to have whatever the outcome is embraced by end users, and they're going to have, because if you're following the process, then they're going to have more practical demands and questions and things that are out there. They're also going to look at the solutions against their real world problems. And if you have that alignment, you're more likely to have the answers, to have the right solutions to fit those things. So that's where, again, this is one of my Buckleyisms. The more that you involve people in the process, the more that people will support the process. And then the last one, and if you're concerned about managing up, you'll more likely have stakeholder satisfaction, because the more that you point back to the alignment. And I always loved when I would have, for managing scope creep, this is kind of an aside here, Sharon, so bonus for watching this. But when people come and they start to the inevitable scope creep discussions about, couldn't we also go and have this? And wouldn't it be nice to go into that? If you're able to very quickly direct it back to the business alignment, and a lot of times you can help to separate those things which are pure scope creep, which are outside of what should be discussed to complete this project and move it forward. I don't know if you have any personal stories of that experience of where business alignment shot down extra scope, extracurricular activities.
Yeah, I mean, I was just actually sitting here thinking through all the different examples. I would say I had an experience once, so many of them, but I had experience once where basically kind of what I was talking about earlier is that we had 3 different departments that were all trying to solve for the same problem. And in that particular scenario, they were trying to improve their training, the way that they delivered training. So they all had separate LMS systems, and each of them was paying kind of a ridiculous amount of money for an individual LMS system. And I've seen this in places with survey tools and all kinds of different products. It's a big problem that people face is they've got these different products, but they had LMS systems. They were paying different money in different places. And then there was a couple of departments that had no system. And so they were just struggling to deliver. And it's funny because they were all calling me, and I was kind of a central point in IT for application development and enterprise applications. And they're like, we need help. And I just kept noticing, I'm like, hey, there's like 3 or 4 departments and they've all got the same problem, but they were using different tools. Some had none, some had homegrown, some were spending a lot of money. And so I said to them, I'm like, I have a crazy idea. How about we all get in a room and we all talk about at a business level what our problem is and how we can solve it together. And here's my recommendation. All of you guys have your own interdepartmental funding that you're not sending outside of your department. And if everybody was to chip in a little bit, maybe, just maybe, we could all agree on one system, manage it together, be able to have a better budget for it. And I had like one group that had like not very much funding, another group that had more funding. I'm like, but if everybody can kind of chip in together and work together, we can come up with a solution. And so I brought every delegate from each department into a meeting room. We had the conversation. We identified all the problems. I know this is going to shock you, but 80% of them were the same for all of them. And we were actually able to, instead of having a departmental level funding solution, we took all of that, we took it to an executive level steering committee meeting. And the steering committee said, well, if this is a business level problem that everybody's experiencing, we'll chip in to help too. And so we were able to solve the problem for these individual departments at a business level. We created a full-on project. They had support of the change management department, and everybody was so much happier and, you know, created this business level solution.
You know, I was thinking about, so much of this is about, having transparency into what's happening around the project. And I was thinking back of a couple examples like you. I mean, I've run into this in a number of different, companies and with different clients. And I go way back to working for the phone company. My second role at the company was as it was when I was in my mid to late 20s, was the director of handsets and accessories. And so I was in charge of, and if this was for folks, it was back with Pacific Bell before it got rebranded as Singular. I was over at the wireless company. So it started as Pacific Bell Mobile Services, then Pac Bell Wireless, then became Singular. Yeah. Anyway, but long time ago, I'm old. But with all of that was dealing with like a number of restarts for a couple different programs. And one of the areas that I was focused on was resale of airtime, of minutes to various, cellular mobile companies that were out there. It was like by law, we had to offer it, and there were a lot of problems with it. But anyway, the issue here is that, or how helped solve this, was that we started to be very transparent about where we were on the IT on the back end, the difficulties that we're having. And I've shared about in other episodes too, just made me think about like when I had a pool built in my backyard in California, and the problems that I had. It was very similar. There are a lot of parallels there, where the problem I had with the pool vendor is that they would never return a phone call. Like they were having valid issues. Like the city needed to come out and review things. That was usually the case. Some inspector that was weeks behind, never coming out there. But the fact that the vendor never answered my questions made me angry. Loved the end product, but I was so burned by the process that, and the lack of transparency of what was happening. Like I'm not going to refer anybody over to you guys. And so with the phone company, that example, because we talked about, we're very transparent with where we were, the struggles that we had. We had very real issues where people were suing us, companies were suing us because we weren't doing the state mandated must resell this, like all this. And we were just trying to explain, like, look, we're not trying to withhold this. Like, here's very real technical issues with why. So again, because we involved people in the process, they understood that. And then we could, we showed like the difference between the project to execute and the business requirements, the business need, how we were aligned to where we were. It was overall people, even these companies that felt like they were being slighted, they were being ignored, had a higher level of satisfaction. And And we ended up having some really strong relationships with a number of the vendors that had previously been suing us. So I also had a great relationship with our legal department because of all this mess. So they loved the fact that going and talking to people and providing, the phrase is, lifting the kimono a bit, showing what we're working on, giving that transparency. It helped align a lot of the understanding where the project was and where we actually were. So I think that's true for internal projects. Talking about alignment again can help set the course and can better set expectations across the board. Then you start to get better queries. You're still going to have this scope creep issue, but it should be more aligned with what the actual objectives are of the project.
Yeah. Everywhere I go, I always ask, do you have an enterprise application, enterprise architecture team, or people that kind of help to manage that for this exact reason? And I think a lot of times people see enterprise architecture and oh yeah, we have an enterprise architecture team, and they think of it in terms of infrastructure, networking, things like that. But they don't think about, to your point, that transparency, collaboration, communication at the process layer, at the application layer, at the program layer. They think about it hardware, but they don't think about it on the other side. And I think, oftentimes there are certain people who will step up and recognize it and do it, but a lot of times there's not a dedicated, group or team or role to handle that. And it's a big deal.
It's like the difference between, there are some PMs that are just really good at, they just do this naturally. They're over communicating on that. They're bringing people in, and people like, everybody wants that PM. They request that. Then you have the other PMs that are more on the technical side. They might be more technical and accurate and more capable to go on the complexity of those projects, but their bedside manner is not there. And everybody requests the one that's really good at the communication, at the follow-ups, and all of that. And I mean, the reality is that you're going to always have people that have different styles, but you can, if it's part of your methodology, you can ensure that everybody has at least a baseline competence in as part of your methodology to reassure people, like, here's the alignment, here's the business objectives, here's who my stakeholders are. We've identified your concern and we're communicating. We're transparent around the process.
And where to go for information. I think that's another big piece of it. I think there's this idea, there's this thought, well, everybody needs to send it to me. And then there's people who are like, oh, I don't want information sent to me if it's not relevant to me. And then there's other people who are like, no, I want all the information. And I think if you can create a methodology where like, look, the information is available to the right people, but you just have to kind of go self-serve if you're not an active participant in what's going on. I think, we're going to start talking about like different strategies. But I think a big way of doing that is really making sure that people know what they're looking for and where to find that information if they have access to it, so that they don't feel inundated with information, but they feel like they can get what they need.
Yeah. Well, that's always the key. I mean, I think of overall strategies for achieving business alignment. One, I think the PM, the stakeholder team, that group needs to understand and agree on the core business objectives. And this is one of those things as a project manager, where again, I would go back and hold people. It's like, that's not what we agreed to. Here was the scope. Here's what's documented. We all sat in that room. We all agreed. You can't now be coming to me with this extra thing without it going through the change control and the review, that entire PCR process. And so having that initial understanding, then having as part of this, and it goes back to communication on a regular basis. How are we reaching those stakeholders? So if you have your PMO, you have a governance body that's looking at a weekly, twice a month, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, hopefully it's not quarterly. I'd say at least monthly. I know I say this every time, but at least monthly. But I'd say even more frequently than that. But that's where it's the structured, here's the project, the portfolio view of that, the multiple projects, the phases, where we are, here's the new requests, here's the PCRs, here's all of the, the change requests that have come in. But that in addition to those meetings, when you know that a new request or the state of a phase of the project impacts one or more stakeholders individually, that you're reaching out and you're getting them involved, in between those meetings, being very proactive about that communication and that level of outreach. The more that you can do that kind of, again, I just keep thinking bedside manner, reaching out to people, communicating, the more likely then they will reach out when they have other thoughts or feedback. They'll be more engaged than they would otherwise.
Yep, 100% agree.
I was thinking too, other parts of this of, business-driven metrics around that. Again, the organization, when, probably has metrics for meeting that company-wide initiative. And you need to make sure that what you're delivering for this project, if you have that alignment, that connection to that larger company-wide initiative, is what are the metrics showing your progress against that? So that should be part of your project-specific KPIs. For example, using metrics that reflect revenue impact. So as you're making changes, how does this improve customer satisfaction or, the overall operational efficiency, which again, if you're making operations more efficient, you can tie to 10% improvement in efficiency back to the percentage of hourly or annual employee costs. You can put an actual number on those efficiency improvements, tying it back to that revenue impact.
And as much as possible, these need to be the same. So, when we think about enterprise level and, business driven, the idea here is that we're picking the same template, the same information, the same query, the same data for every single project at a high level, so that when our stakeholders, our executives, look at that, they're comparing apples to apples. I think it's really important because a lot of times, you'll get different information from different projects or different information from different PMs or different information from different groups. And that's when I think stakeholders and executives really struggle with making decisions, because they're not able to compare apples to apples as they don't understand it. So I think as much as possible, those metrics and the reporting should be as systematic and equalized, normalized as you can for all of that.
Right. One issue, and I know we've talked about it extensively here, and we've just talked about it a couple of times already, but this idea of the cross-functional team that looks across, the stakeholders are not just going to be, you might be a project manager over in IT. It's not, even if it's an IT project, there should be business stakeholders there that provide some level of oversight, as well as that, anything you do in IT, it's going to have impacts to the rest of the business. Question for you, Sharon, have you ever leveraged as part of that, that governance body, that PMO, that project team, formal business process mapping? Have you worked with clients that have been very detailed, using visual mapping tools of key business systems or processes, and then as part of your discussions, looking at from that visualization standpoint of those processes of what's being impacted, where changes are happening?
Yeah, in fact, at the very beginning of my career, early in my career, there's this thing called business process management notation, BPMN, which is like a formal methodology around documenting business processes. And I used to participate in that, and one of my jobs was really to map those processes. And throughout, doing the Six Sigma program, that's a big part of Six Sigma is mapping those processes so that you can identify and eliminate waste statistically and quantitatively. And I have found that the most successful places that I have worked with, the most mature organizations, are very, very concerned, and they prioritize documenting their processes. In fact, when I started my own business, and I don't always do everything, 100%. And I'm always, learning and growing and maturing. But one of the things that I took really seriously was writing down all of my processes, even if it was just step 1, step 2, step 3. And it's something that I still work on today. We're currently mapping processes for my business. And I think all mature businesses or businesses that really want to be successful should really put a group together around being able to do that, because I think it makes a huge difference. Everybody knows what's going on. Roles understand steps and processes. You're able to very quickly identify and eliminate the waste in the process. And you're also very quickly able to adapt and be flexible around something if you already know like which roles and which actions are happening at what steps. You can kind of zoom in and say, oh, we need to make a change. And instead of having to be like, well, just going to try and see, you can be like, I know that if I make this change, we have a high confidence of understanding what is going to be impacted. So yeah, I mean, I think it's huge.
That I guess I feel lucky that I started my career in the data warehousing world, where part of my job as an analyst and then as a project manager was in making changes to the standard operating procedures. So actually writing SOPs for the data centers, and being able to go in, hey, we're going to make this change. Okay, studying and understanding. Here's the standard operating procedures for this location. Here's how they're different from this other location. Both data centers owned by the same company can have different SOPs depending on like what types of data and protocols and things that are there. Higher levels of security, that was part of the differences and for some of the changes there. So going in and understanding, hey, this new project, this system, and the tight timeline that we have, how it's impacting how we need to work within those SOPs to get this stuff done. But anyway, having that experience working in those environments, and that's much more detailed than many of my other future clients had. But having that understanding of that formalized governance around project management helped me with building out frameworks, and as you know, eventually going on and building PMOs for companies in that very structured approach. But I also learned that sometimes, like I had a very dynamic director who once we had a great conversation. I would say she was very passionate about it, but it was like, she used other colorful language, forget the steps, these steps of the process. This is what we need to go and do. But I held to documenting the request, i.e. demand, to drop the formal process, to bypass this, to go get this done. And that documentation helped cover my butt later when my manager then asked, why did you bypass this? Mm-hmm. Documented. Here's what actually happened here. But that was the right way to approach that. That was now you think of the tactical steps for maintaining business alignment. Part of that is documenting that change. How can you then go back and improve at the end if those changes were undocumented? It doesn't just look like you went rogue.
Yeah, no, 100%. I always joke, the technical term for that is CYA. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if everybody's not on the same page, and you think about going on, I think we've used this analogy before, going on a really long trip and not checking your GPS or not looking at the map to see where you are for 3 days. Like, I mean, how would you know where you're at? I think it's kind of the same way.
Because I have a Thomas guide in my car, Sharon. That's why I know I don't need my phone to work. I've got a good old school map. Now the map hasn't been, it's a physical map. If you don't know what a Thomas guide is, it's a booklet form. It has been updated in 28 years, but I still have it.
But I mean, it's probably perfectly fine. And I feel like people do that a lot of times around, business process and mapping and project management and things like that. We've got a guide. It's been around here for 30 years. Nobody ever looks at it, but like, it's all right. We all follow it. I'm like, well, if you followed that, you'd be following it right into the ocean, buddy. But like, but I think at the end of the day, if you think about making sure that everybody's on the same page. And I think we come back to this every single episode. Everybody needs to be on the same page. We're all playing the same game. We've all got the same goal. We're all saving the same problem. If you know what's going on, then you're going to check in on a regular basis. You're going to review everything together as a team. You're going to understand what your priorities. You're going to work on, hey, what's the priority du jour, right? And sometimes that needs to flex a little bit. Maybe we need to be able to be adaptable around that.
I think that is critical. If you think of like people love from this series, those what are the practical steps? Like, what do I actually need to go and do? And number one, have regular checkpoints, have review to make sure. Like, have we become misaligned? I just was watching that Tom Cruise. I've caught it over the weekend. I watched half of the movie where it's in the future with the Tet, with the evil robots AI up in the sky.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wrecked the movie for anybody that's not seen that one. What was that called? But anyway, he's with his counterpart. They're flying around and they're clones and that whole thing. But they're constantly asking the robot overlords are asking, like, are you still aligned? Are you able to work together? Kind of thing. And you have to have those regular checkpoints. And if you say no, then the robots come and destroy you both. So that's what we learned.
So it's a lesson to learn today.
But but as part of that, if you're regularly meeting, going through, having those conversations, then you're able to adapt and change to the changing business priorities. I mean, that's one of the reasons why if nothing ever changed, you wouldn't need to have the checkpoints because you'd have the project plan. Everybody knows what they need to do. Go do it over the next 12 weeks and we're done at the end. Like, no, stuff happens. Problems come up. Things weren't properly planned out. The business needs change. I know we asked for this, but now that we see the first iteration of it, we need something slightly different.
Every time.
Said occasionally, but yeah, every time. But
except for government.
But that adaptation is part of the model. It's part of the discussion. You expect it. You're not surprised by that. And then you have the clear communication, and that's where you're going back and where things start to look like they're going to be derailed. The scope creep is creeping in, and you go back and you say, look, here's what the business goals are. Is this still staying true to the business goals, or do we need to make changes here? And then, of course, the continuous engagement with the stakeholders, that's part of that. And then the last thing is one of your and I's, our favorite parts of all of this is the post-mortem, looking back and evaluated, what did we learn from this project? And the end result, is it still aligned with the business? And if not, can we see where it went slightly off mark?
Yeah, sometimes called a retrospective or lessons learned. The idea of basically at the end of something, identifying, what went right, what went wrong, how can we use that information next time to do it better?
Yeah, and I mean, the benefits of doing this, of taking the time to make sure that things are aligned, is that one, you're more likely going to have a positive project outcome. You're going to achieve that. The stakeholders, even if you didn't achieve everything that you set out at the beginning of the project, if people are involved and engaged, they're going to understand why, where there were misses. And so again, with that Buckleyism of the more you involve people in the process, the more people support the process. That includes if they disagree with some of the end results of that. If they're involved in the process, then they understand, okay, this is why we made this decision. This is why we're slightly misaligned, or we stayed aligned and I didn't get exactly what I wanted out of the project. It's all part of that. And that has a direct impact on stakeholder confidence, on end user adoption, and then how much you learn about the next project, how, easier it gets or more accurate it will be because of your approach and that alignment.
It's the same reason why when we watch sports on television, the more they communicate what's happening in the game and what the statistics are and what's happening along the way, the more, the more they do that, the more engaged you are with watching that happen. It's the same thing in a project. The more you keep people involved and the more you kind of give them a play-by-play more often, and the more you give them statistics and information to go with that, the more engaged they're going to be. Think about it as this is your audience that's going to, participate and watch. Make sure to keep them involved.
Yeah. That's one reason why I appreciate having like the integrated project management tools built into the discussions. Just had this with a client call this morning where, we had almost the entire time up on screen. We had the work breakdown structure and we're going through the status and talking about completion of these things and next steps and who's working on what. And so we're living, breathing, making adjustments, moving tasks around to that, so that everyone has visibility and we know, okay, we make this decision. Here's the impact. We need to go do this. We need to answer these questions. So I love having that integrated in. And then I also like involving stakeholders as early as possible in the process, talking to them about their critical input, so that you make sure that you're starting the right way, that they are comfortable with providing feedback throughout.
Yeah, I did a presentation on how to get business and IT on the same page for a business analysis user group a couple of weeks ago, and I pulled out the handy dandy old picture, where the one with the tree and the tire swing, and what they thought they wanted and what they thought they needed and what they got. And it, the earlier you can bring them in, the more whether you're on the right track or not. And I think at the end of the day, if you wait till the end, you're going to have invested all this time and energy in something, and 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to have to make a change.
I was just thinking to summarize here to wrap up. I want to reinforce this idea that aligning your project management tools and methodologies and your overall project with core business processes is really essential for improving collaboration, engagement, productivity, end user adoption, all of those things. So I guess my call to action for project managers is to go and review your current alignment strategies. Where are you having the discussions around, hey, everybody, let's slow down for a minute. Like, what are we actually trying to do here? Get out of the weeds of the project itself and talk at that higher level. Like, how often are you doing that? Do you have that facility, that time set aside to have that conversation, to ensure that future projects are also well aligned with business goals? You have to make room for this. You can't just expect it to happen and that people just understand it.
Yeah. And everyone asks, I said this at the very beginning, everyone asks, what's the purpose of enterprise or architecture, organizational management, change management, and having things at the enterprise level? This is the purpose. Because if you have this, everybody's kind of following the same plan, everybody's on the same page, everybody's communicated with, and your projects just end up way more successful.
Way more. Way more.
Statistically, way more.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. Sharon, it's great having these discussions. Of course, you can find us out on the Twitters and on the socials. We're out there all over the place. If you enjoyed this, this was episode 20. Wow. So yeah, we are every week. There seems to be a new episode, Sharon.
Every week.
Next week, by the way, maybe we should start doing this. Talk about what we're talking about next week, but I'll probably forget. But we are talking about the role of internal champions. So the champions discussion, how important it is to have those executive sponsors and champions. They're not always your sponsor, they could still be a champion of the program. Of course, you can find past episodes out on YouTube under Buckley Planet. Find it all over the place. I think you've got them on your personal YouTube page. Do you have them linked as well, Sharon?
Yep, they're in the playlist.
And then, of course, we also have our group out on Facebook. If you want to go share ideas for topics, future topics, or feedback on episodes, please do that. Otherwise, we will be back next Monday, same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, every Monday for the rest of our lives. We will be there. So please go take a look and subscribe. And hopefully we'll see you next Monday.
Yeah, thanks for coming. See you next time.
Bye.